Welcome to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where we feature top leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry with your host, Drew Hendricks. Now, let's get started with the show.
Drew Thomas Hendricks here. I'm the host of the Legends Behind the Craft podcast, where I talk with leaders in the wine and craft beverage industry. Today's episode, sponsored by Barrels Ahead. Barrels Ahead, we work with you to implement a one-of-a-kind marketing strategy, one that highlights your authenticity, tells your story, and connects you with your ideal customers. In short, we help wineries and craft beverage producers unlock their story to unleash their revenue. Go to barrelsahead.com today to learn more. Bianca Harmon, our D2C strategist, is joining us again today. How's it going, Bianca?
It's going good, Drew. Last time I talked to you, I think we talked to Andrew up in the Washington area. And so today I'm excited to talk to Luke in the Willamette Valley.
Yes, we're shifting states. Today we have Luke Wylde on the show. Luke is the owner and winemaker. Hello, Luke. He's the owner and winemaker for Statera Cellars, a Willamette Valley winery exclusively devoted to Chardonnay. Luke runs Statera along with his friend Meredith Bell, and he also has his own label, Lara's Wines, which allows him to explore different styles and push his creativity. In Luke's own words, he's a firm believer in legend and immerses himself in all things fantastical, driving in spaces and wrestling with magic. Welcome to the show, Luke.
Hi, thanks so much.
And I just want to wish you a happy Pride Month.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great month to be queer.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it's always a good time to be queer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're looking fantastic today. So
Thanks.
Tell me, for those of us like this, the Pride Month, tell us a little bit about it and kind of to us, so I'm straight and I need to learn more about this. Educate us.
Yeah. So I grew up in a very conservative background, and I'm kind of a baby queer in terms of having been like publicly out. It really only came out, I think, officially in 2019. I'm turning 40 this summer. So for me, it was kind of like a delayed response of publicly recognizing my queerness. My spouse, they recognize it for a very long time. I'm married to a woman, so like from the outside looking in, we look like the normal kind of white heteronormative couple.
Mm-hmm.
But the more that we have examined and explored ourselves with one another, the more that we've kind of unlocked the potential of our personalities. And for me, that looked like recognizing that I'm a genderqueer, non-binary person and really allowing myself to lean into what that looks like for me. Pride Month really does give me an opportunity to celebrate that quite publicly, take part in some Pride events here in the Valley. I'm actually doing on this Friday, I'm doing the world's first queer wine fest here in the United States. It's going to be in the Willamette Valley. And, I think like taking some pride in who we are and celebrating that, because, I mean, let's be real. Have you ever met a queer person that's not a heck of a lot of fun? And we like to have a lot of fun together. So it's a good opportunity to have parties all month and celebrate our queerness.
Actually, and celebrate the authenticity.
Big time.
Wherever you may want to express it. So within the Willamette community, talk about being like a queer winemaker and how that affects your sort of winemaking styles and your expressions.
I used to think that it didn't have any impact on like the way that I do things. And the more that I examine especially with the Laris wines or Laris wines, the more that I examine those wines, the more I do see just how much of a reflection those wines are in my own sort of kind of queer personality and identity. A lot of the way that looks is on the label artwork. The label artwork is super colorful, often features rainbows or some sort of like gradient of a rainbow. And I started making those wines before I was out. And so I kind of didn't even really like think about it at the time that my social life, which has a lot of queer elements to it, even before I was out, gave me a lot of space to be comfortable and in kind of expressing these versions of this like kind of queerness, non-binary life. And I think that the more that I've leaned into like really publicly recognizing my queerness,
Mhm.
the more that I just kind of allow the wines to also be reflections of how much fun I'm having in that. Like that I am not afraid of being this kind of person anymore.
Fitting
Um,
the wines into a specific style that you think the public wants to see, rather than
yeah,
kind of
definitely.
express themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I went from, thinking like, oh, I need to be making single variety type wines
Mhm.
to now I'm making wines that are like grapes and apples. And this year I'm making like another kind of fruit kind of co-ferment with Pinot Noir. So
I love
not
that.
that I'm the first person to be doing that, but I think a big part of why I'm doing that um, is wanting to make wines that are going to be like elements of the kind of party that I want to be at,
Mhm.
or are going to be reflections of that kind of fun and colorful personality.
So do you
Yeah.
think wine has given you like an outlet for you to be able to really share and represent who you are and what you believe and stand behind? Has it been
Yeah.
channel?
I think it does. I never felt like I had that freedom working for other people. And I often felt like held back by working for larger companies,
Mhm.
to be fully myself. But owning my own labels has really given me the opportunity to lean more into kind of that sort of creative outlet in terms of winemaking. And then I didn't realize at the time that kind of by proxy, it also gave me an opportunity to be more myself in person and in general. Because like when I go out to a big kind of public wine tasting and I'm showing one of my wines, like I get to be me. I don't have to be a representative of another company. I'm, a 50-50 owner of Statera, and I own Larry's, and I don't have to act like I'm some sort of like agent of some like old white people owned, you know, shadow conservative type company that
Mhm.
doesn't really fit my values or ethics. So
That
it's
must feel
really,
super
yeah,
liberating.
Well, and in that, if I recall, Luke, you really take pride in taking care of employees and practicing the right um, things in regards to the employees. And can you elaborate a little bit on all of that and what you do
yeah.
and
I'm
believe
glad
in?
that you remembered that. I think that this is a broader conversation that I think every company should be having. Meredith and I we're a 2-person company. We don't have employees. We
Mhm.
will, I hope, starting this year as we're trying to like expand and grow, we will. But we, as negociants that are not landowners, we purchase fruit from all over Oregon. This year, because of frost, it's going to be all over Washington as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Hit
and
hard
we'll definitely talk about frost too, because I think people should talk about that for this vintage for Willamette Valley. But one of the things that we set as a model for ourselves is that we'll only purchase fruit from vineyards that can prove they're paying living wages and
Wow.
providing some access to healthcare for everybody, even temporary seasonal workers that are just there for a couple of weeks picking grapes.
Mhm.
Access to healthcare can look like a lot of different things. It doesn't mean like when you show up, you're going to get your Blue Cross Blue Shield card and you get to like have your $30 premium. It's not like that, or your copay rather. It's like some access looks like people know they're not going to lose their job or be screwed if they get hurt on a job picking grapes for a couple of weeks. Hopefully, like as we grow and expand, and hopefully we own our own vineyard at some point, we will be able to offer everybody more substantial health care. And for us, it looks like, paying people transparently. Like ideally, if we were, running our own tasting room, which hopefully we're going to be opening one this summer here in Portland. If I have a part-time employee, I'm going to let them know what I'm making. And I'm hoping that their starting wages is somewhere in the kind of mid-20s as a part-time person, not like somewhere in the 15s, because anybody knows that $15 an hour as a minimum wage which is around where it is here in Portland. It's not really a living wage. And that's not really like, everybody knows that that's the case.
Mhm.
So we think that like purchasing fruit with these sorts of values in mind makes our fruit decisions better. On top of purchasing fruit that's, only organic or biodynamic, this year is going to be a stretch because of the big frosts. So there's going to be some sustainably farmed fruit purchased. But purchasing fruit where the owners of that land which is already kind of occupied land anyway, because everything is native land. And now a bunch of white owned companies are planting vineyards here and claiming it as theirs in their own sort of weird colonized way. Owners of that land are showing that the people that are working that land have just as much value as the sort of ethos of their farming. Because at the end of the day, if people are so hung up about organics and biodynamics and the natural wine community, but don't really give a pause or a second thought to the value of the life of the people that are farming that land, then we're doing something really wrong. And we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves if this sort of like holier than thou natural winemaking 0-0 mentality actually fits our ethics and our ethos for how we're living our lives for everything else.
That makes complete sense. It's really so timely that you're talking about this. That workforce sustainability, treating an egalitarian workforce has been a topic over the last few episodes that we've had. And anecdotally, the winemakers and the winery people that run the wineries, if they do give these living wages, they do give healthcare, they do have some sort of commitment to their workforce, they've seen productivity increase, they've seen happiness increase, they've seen a pride in work that's not relevant, that's not prevalent, even if you start just paying the people more. It's that whole commitment to the workforce.
I will say too, personally, I worked in wineries for a very long time. And I actually was always taken care of at my wineries way better than I was ever taken care of anywhere else. And we had workers coming in from 45 minutes to an hour away from wineries I worked at because it was worth it because of the wages the wineries were paying and the benefits they were offering versus what was being offered to them and surrounding areas. And I do like to say that I live in St. Helena, but I do like to say that I think I think it's really important, and it says something when you have people coming over an hour away to come work for wineries because they're actually taking care of their people, unlike these other businesses. It's a bummer.
Yeah, there's definitely some merit there. I do think, this is part of the conversation that we kind of had in the sort of pre-show vibe that we were chatting about, of like decentering our sort of white perspectives from how these things work, because it's pretty easy as three ostensibly white people. I don't know your background, so forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn here. It's pretty easy for us to say like, well, my experience has been great, but not really thinking about like the sort of Black and brown people that are doing most of the farming and really considering whether or not their experience is matching ours. And that's where we have a responsibility as white people to have a broader conversation around decentering our perspectives from the narrative of what everybody else's experience looks like in a farming sort of atmosphere. And this is where, asking farm owners and asking vineyard owners and winery owners for some transparency around how they're paying people, and not just the white cellar hands, like really everybody, like the people that are only working for you for the, couple weeks a year that you're going to be picking. Are they getting paid in an equitable way? Are you willing to be transparent about that? And for me and Meredith, if the answer for them is no, that's none of your business, we say, then we don't have any business with you. And we have had to not work with people because of that. And frankly, I'm not losing any sleep over it. Like I would rather lose some cool fruit than work with some uncool people.
Absolutely. As you're going through there and you're vetting out the different vineyards, so you're boots on the ground. What is your experience? How many people have you just had to just look away from? And how many, like what percentage of I guess the question is, what percentage of the wineries are doing it right?
So I would say that like the percentage of wineries that are doing it right is increasing in large part because of what you were referencing, Drew, about the sort of like the problems that workforce is having in general. People just aren't willing to work for less than what they're worth anymore. And for good reason, I think the sort of like age of worker exploitation is still something that we're in, but hopefully we're kind of on the back end of that. As we have been having this conversation with folks, a lot of people are saying like, look, like, 5 years ago, I could pay a tractor driver, just around minimum wage. Now tractor drivers don't want to work for less than like 25 an hour. And that's okay. Like, great. That's what I want to hear. The like access to healthcare can look like a lot of different things. So as long as there's some sort of like provision in there, that's kind of where we have to land. Hopefully we have some more like public healthcare at some point where all of us are covered, and that's not even a conversation that we have to have. It's kind of embarrassing that an economy this large and a country that is, purportedly this developed, still has as many healthcare problems as it does. But I think that's kind of a common understanding that most of us have, especially small business owners like yourselves, of what that actually looks like.
Is there an organization? Because you can get your vineyard certified organic, and there's a lot of there's a lot of structure around certifying a vineyard, but what about certified sustainable employment? Is there some sort of organization that puts a seal of approval on it?
Yeah, so you can be like a certified B Corp. I think there's plenty of companies that are doing good work as being a certified B Corp. But even locally, we've seen like anybody that lives here in Oregon is familiar with this kind of local natural grocery store called New Seasons. New Seasons locally is doing they're a certified B Corp, but they're doing a hell of a job to try to union bust. They're trying to prevent their employees from forming unions. So this seems anathema to kind of what the concept of being a certified B Corp is. Why wouldn't you want to have your employees unionize if you've gone through all the trouble of making sure that they're already having a quality of life standard that B Corp makes you kind of prove in how you're hiring people and how you're like giving them the sort of quality of life to via wages, time off, maternity leave, et cetera, then why is having a union such a big deal? So in the same way that like being certified organic means that there's kind of a lot of stuff that you can still spray on the ground that is maybe not necessarily that good for the world. The same thing goes for a lot of these organizations. Like, ultimately, Meredith and I only purchase fruit, for the most part. But this year is definitely going to be an exception to that. That's organic and biodynamic. The same thing kind of goes like, we don't care if people are certified. And the reason for that is most small vineyards don't have the sort of liquid cash on hand to get that really expensive certification. For us, it has a lot more to do with the like actual intention of the people doing the work. If you're doing the work, I don't really care if you got a gold star, right? Like the work is the work. And it's kind of where you can find like a lot of joy in that labor too. And like I said, like I sleep at night. Like I didn't used to sleep this well, but now that I truly am like heading down this kind of self-employed path as this, kind of emerging little winery that has these sorts of standards, like my dreams have improved, right? My sleep has improved, my social life has improved, even my professional life and the way that I can speak with my growers and other winemakers. I just feel so much more confident in the work that I'm doing because I believe in the work that I'm doing. And
even if it's this one thing that even if it's just one person's mind that you change by saying, oh, you can't offer that to me, then fine. Like you can't tell me if your employees are taken care of, then fine. But it will get somebody's mind thinking and ticking. And that right there is enough reason to continue going down the path that you are going.
Absolutely.
Personally, like, little side story, but like I'm a home birth mom, and I shared something on Instagram recently about traumatic births and how, hospitals get too involved with women that don't need all of this care. And I had 2 women reach out to me about it and share their experiences of something that happened at a hospital. And I just asked for some books on home birthing. And I was like, that's it. I did my part. Like, I just like, okay, somebody was like, I experienced this and it was terrible in this. Like, can you give me some guidance? And I was like, sure. And I was like, that's it. I did my part. Even if it just gets one person's mind thinking and doing the work that you're doing, you can rest easy at night.
Yeah. Good for you. I'm a home birth child. So is my sister.
I love it.
Yeah. So, I think that like, the Steinbeck said something kind of similar to this in Grapes of Wrath, about how as long as companies are at the center of profiting from food, there is always going to be hunger when poor people cannot afford their products. And the same thing goes for healthcare in the United States, and in particular around the healthcare of pregnant women, and especially women of color, that these are marginalized populations. All women just suffer from the hands of companies that really just want to profit off of their pregnancies. And if we're profiting off of the sort of formation and foundation of life, then we're really fucking up. I'm sorry. Like, this is not okay. And
100%.
The same thing. Yeah, I think we're all kind of in agree. We all agree here, right? Like, this seems like common sense.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to get the sort of status quo of like primarily white CEOs of these large companies to not to take people over profit.
Mm-hmm. No, very true words. I still going back onto the certifications and how the B Corp, I didn't realize that had such a commitment to employment sustainability. I thought it had another thing to do with nonprofit. The question though is like the ability to just purchase a seal, to purchase a certification really is if you're not following through the organization, it's more of a marketing ploy. The companies that have the money to get the certifications, to get the B Corp, they get the benefit from being able to display that seal, but they may not actually be living that, as you mentioned in the case of that store, through and through. So yeah, it's good that you actually go out and actually investigate whether or not that's true. So now you've got this fruit. I want to switch to a little bit about your winemaking philosophy and style, and the decision to go like with Statera, an exclusively Chardonnay based winery in the Willamette Valley.
So we started Statera in 2014. For Meredith, it had a lot to do with like seeing. So Meredith went to UC Davis. She has a master's degree in vit and enology. I think it's an amazing degree that like has really done a lot for our company. I went to Loyola Marymount and have a bachelor's degree in theater. So like my kind of path is way different than hers. So for Meredith, it was all about how Chardonnay is one of those very unique grapes that is kind of equal parts a reflection of terroir in a winemaker's hand. And I firmly believe that, because you can make Chardonnay in myriad ways and be pleased with the results. For myself, it was that I kind of like Googled like best way to start a company when Meredith and I were like, let's start a winery. And it was like, have your company be the first of something. And so for us, I was like, well, there's no Chardonnay only place here in the Willamette Valley. And so we were like, cool, that's the one. And so that sort of like thinking brought us to very much kind of a shared concept of making like Chardonnays of place without any additions. So we don't do any acid adds, we don't filter, we don't fine. We add very little sulfur to the whole thing. We also don't use any new oak. So like all of our Chardonnay is fermented and aged in neutral oak barrels. We over vintage all of our Chardonnay with the exception of the pet nat. And we also don't really like move the wine around a lot. We keep the wine on its fermentation lees, because we really like this sort of like prolonged oxidative autolysis flavor that comes about in seeing how Chardonnay lees age. And it's become kind of like a primary flavor. Like our wines are super oxidative. I think like if you try a Statera Chardonnay, you are like, oh my God, this thing's like pretty plush. But a signature for us is also like maintaining natural acidity. So our picks are always kind of designed around keeping the pH where we want it to be, and then just making sure that those things are going to hang out and barrel for a really long time and benefit from that.
So are they super oaky whites or?
Well, everything is a neutral French oak, but we don't make anything with new oak. So they're not oaky in that they taste like oak. They're oaky in that they have had the benefit of being in that hyper oxidative environment of an oak barrel. I think that we could achieve the same results from being in a neutral acacia barrel or a neutral chestnut barrel or a neutral any wood barrel. But yeah, because all of our barrels, we're buying barrels that are at least 5 years old. So they've already been used 5 times. They don't taste like oak anymore. The wines end up having all the benefit of being in a barrel without any of the flavor of toasted oak on it.
Yeah, I haven't tasted your wines, but visually they look super interesting.
Oh,
and I want
thanks.
to use funky in the most positive thing possible. Like looking at the colors and the unfilteredness of them, they look just like something I'd want to taste through them. When someone comes to Statera and they kind of taste through your wines, they've got to be surprised with the variety, because a lot of times a winery seems to have a house style where there's, you can see the different vineyard expressions, but with you, it looks like the full gamut of the Chardonnay varietal in all of its different expressions beyond just the vineyard.
Yeah, that's the goal. I mean, that's kind of speaks to that kind of concept that Meredith has, that Chardonnay is both an equal reflection of terroir and also the winemaker's hand in it. And so for us, having this kind of opportunity to really focus on this one grape has just given us the kind of headspace to imagine like how many ways can we make Chardonnay in a natural way. So for us, that looks like it's never going to look like a dessert wine, because we wouldn't be able to like get a wine to stick being sweet and sticky without, having to filter it. So like we're not going to filter any of our Statera wines. But it does mean that we can make skin contact wines, or it does mean that, we have a barrel of Chardonnay that's been sitting on floor for 6 years. We have, a Solera of a single vineyard of Chardonnay that's on its 5th year. We have this wine that we released called Rudy's that is we basically like ferment wines to dry, and we never add any sulfur to it, and then we never top the barrels. We just leave them alone for 2 years and let them kind of develop this almost kind of like it's almost like Fino sherry that hasn't been fortified. It's like this hyper oxidative but like bright and crispy acid, which is really pretty versions of Chardonnay that I don't see a lot of American Chardonnay winemakers making wine this way, but there certainly, are more and more people that are experimenting with the grape, because we're being inspired by regions other than Burgundy.
So you're doing skin fermented chards too?
Oh yeah, big time. We love it.
I can tell by the color of them. It looks like.
Yeah, not everything is that way, but we make a couple of them. There are 2 different vineyards this last year. It's a wine that we released called cutis, which is a Latin word for skin. I think that's a good opportunity to talk about this. Statera is a Latin word for balance. So our kind of concept before this whole thing is that like we really want these wines to kind of find a balance for themselves. And the symbol, like our logo, is this like kind of 2 opposite pointing arrows, which is a chemistry symbol for equilibrium. So for us, it's really hoping that these wines do find their own path. They find their own sort of resolution to the story that seems a little predestined when we pick the fruit. Like, how did those chemistries come in? Was the pH in a spot where we figured like this is going to make a wine that is going to be left untopped and unsulfured for 2 years? Or is that going to be a wine that's just going to be like go to our Pétillant Naturel, which is good, like the first wine that we release? No matter what, we're looking at the fruit when it comes in and just making a decision about like what do we want this year. And if the vintage is going to be pretty rough, like 2022 is going to be a really challenging year because of the frost
hoping
that we
it's
had.
as challenging as it's going to get, and we don't have fires to deal with on the back end.
Yeah, it's too early to say.
Talk to us about the frost. You said that there's been a big frost issue up that way.
Yeah, we had a frost event around it was in April, and it was like for the place that I was working at the time, they account for having lost around 90% of their crop.
Oh,
The like low end of loss that I've seen is still around 40 or 50%. So considering that in 2021, we had a really heavy rain right around flowering, and most places lost between 25 and 30%, maybe even more of their crop. In 2020, we had a really big smoky year during vintage. This is now our third year in a row of looking at some pretty extreme weather challenges that are really yucking our yum.
so can I ask something? Do you stick to, in a case or situation like this where you've had multiple years in a row and it seems like everybody is suffering from it, are you still sticking to just buying fruit from the Willamette Valley area, or have you branched into California at all, or do you primarily stick with that region?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bianca. We have kind of primarily focused on the Willamette Valley for as long as we've been making wine. We used to purchase fruit from a vineyard in Washington called Celilo. We stopped buying that fruit a few years ago when sort of some corporate overlords made it a little more challenging for us to do so. This year, and then a couple of years ago, we started purchasing fruit from a smaller AVA, which is south of the Willamette Valley, called Elkton. Really tiny. Like there's only 150 people that live in the AVA in the town there. So it's a really small AVA in this little river valley. One of our friends planted a vineyard there, and we were super impressed with what he was doing. And so we committed to purchasing fruit there for a really long time. So outside of the Willamette Valley and Elkton, Statera is still just going to be purchasing fruit from the Willamette Valley and Elkton this year. We may be purchasing fruit from the Columbia Gorge from a new site that's coming online. I'm going to go visit them in a couple of weeks once flowering and kind of everything has happened. The frost delayed everything by quite a long time, so we're still not even seeing like flowering happen here yet. So we're super delayed. Like anecdotally, we were picking towards the end of August, beginning of September last year, and this year we're not going to be picking anything till around Halloween.
Promises to be a very interesting year. It could be, there could be some really special wines made with the limited production there.
Yeah. So for Larry's, though, I am purchasing fruit from Elkton, from the Willamette Valley, and then all day yesterday I was driving around in kind of central eastern Washington, looking at some fruit from some what will be new sites to me. But some I'm going to take some longer contracts on. Like there's a winery up there called Hedges, which is a biodynamic, amazing site up on Red Mountain AVA in Washington. And so, I mean, for me, like having the opportunity to purchase like Hedges, Red Mountain, biodynamically farmed Syrah is like, cool, sign me up, right? Like I'll take that. And I think Larry's is a really good brand to show off just like what a gorgeous vineyard that is, in maybe like a slightly unconventional way than what Hedges like kind of currently has in mind. But I think they're going to like what I end up doing with it.
For Larry's, where do you get, you said you were looking like beyond Burgundy and Statera for inspiration. Where are you getting in regions of the world your inspiration for your Larry's wines?
So for Statera, I'll start there. I think like the Willamette Valley has done itself a disservice by comparing itself to Burgundy, saying like, oh, we're on the 45th parallel. So is Burgundy.
It doesn't help that every French firm decides to buy vineyards there.
Right. But I mean, it's kind of it seems kind of dumb. Like, why would you, as this sort of like emerging brand, it would be like, we're not trying to be like Pepsi to Coca-Cola, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is truly like a wine region that has the opportunity, the Willamette Valley has the opportunity to make its own name. And so making your name and comparing yourself to somebody else is like if Kobe would have just like been constantly being like, oh, I'm just like Michael Jordan. Like, mm-hmm. Well, then nobody wants that, right? Like we just want you to be Kobe. Like just be Kobe. You're great. Mm-hmm. And the Willamette Valley has done itself a disservice there. I think Meredith and I, for the most part, draw like a lot of our inspiration for what we want to do with Chardonnay from the Jura, because, and you can kind of see it in our bottle shape too, because like, frankly, those wines are great. And that's kind of what I want to drink. And if I'm being honest, like, I don't know a lot of like small producer winemakers that can actually afford to drink Burgundy. but I can afford to drink Jura. So like it makes sense that the stuff that I would draw inspiration from is what I can actually afford, instead of being like, I'm going to be Oregon's DRC, because like that's never going to happen. It's literally never going to happen. For Larry's, like I hesitate to say that I don't draw like inspiration from anywhere, but I really am trying to make wines that are representations of the region where I'm from and where I live. Yeah. So like for Larry's, I really just want to make stuff that tastes like Oregon or tastes like Washington.
And talk to me about that the fruit component, because I've gotten really interested in that kind of wine fruit blends.
Yeah. I started in 2020 making sparkling wine of Pinot Gris, Riesling, and apple cider. The kind of original concept for it for me was kind of like a COVID fever dream, because I got COVID super early in 2020. But I was inspired by Nate Reddy up at High U and Dan Rinke down at Art and Science. They make some kind of cider wine hybrid things that I think are really delicious. For me, it was wanting to make like another, again, like regional representations of beverages, which is like apples have been growing here a lot longer than grapes have. So it stands to reason that the stories of both of those things, like there's space to tell them together. Another is that like I'm getting older and I want to drink things that have lower alcohol, and having something that's 25, 30, 40% apple cider really lowers the alcohol of the whole beverage. So instead of drinking something that's going to be 12.5, 13% alcohol as an all wine, suddenly you're hovering around in the kind of mid 9s for something that's got apple cider. And frankly, like if you want to hang out and have a picnic and safely drive home, share a bottle of bubbles that's 9% with a friend, and you'll never be upset by having less alcohol.
I love it. I want to though, too. You brought up your bottles, and I know that's a big touch point for you too in your business is glass and packaging. And I'd like you to kind of touch on that for us before we get too carried away with time.
Yeah. So time does fly when you're having fun. And I just looked down at the clock and it's like, holy smokes, that went by fast.
I know. And it's just, I was like, we need to talk about this because I know it's big for him.
So I think glass is a very serious conversation that large producers need to be having more and more around the world, because the last I checked, we really only have around maybe 20, maybe 30 years left of sand left on planet Earth that we can mine that is of the quality to make windows and to make glass bottles. Really? So the same kind of glass that goes into a window is the same kind of glass that goes into a glass bottle. Because we only have 25 to 30 years of this left, it means that we either have to get super creative around like alternative forms of packaging, or we have to adopt, more reuse, not just recycling. Because even if you're recycling a bottle, let's say you're making you're going to crush down a bottle and you're going to blow it back into something else. It still requires 30% new product to make a bottle again. So no matter what, that system is not like a closed system of recycling. It is a problem that we're running out of glass, not just for bottles, but I mean, construction's not slowing down. People are going to want windows on their buildings, and modern architecture calls for really big, huge glass panels. And, modern distribution of wine and lots of other packaged goods calls for huge lots of glass bottled things that can be distributed kind of all over the planet. We really should have a broader industry-wide conversation about what's next. Glass is not our future. It cannot be. It never will be. And we are really reaching the kind of the brink, like the edge is coming up, where it's going to be so unsustainable in terms of cost. And I'm sure that most producers you talk to now are speaking to how difficult it's becoming to find glass. Oh, yeah, that was the supply chain. But even before that, last year, I had a long conversation with Erica Harrop at Global Package. We were talking about the weights of the bottles, and then she's been looking into what's called natural glass, because most of the wine bottles can't really use that amount of recycled glass in it because they're not clear enough. Natural glass has the bubbles. It looks almost like a Patron bottle, one of those. Yeah. And there's a little bit of that going on in Italy right now, but right now there's no glass plants that can actually handle that.
and produce a bottle, especially in the United States. It all has to come from overseas, which increases the cost and the amount of energy it takes to actually get the bottles to the winery.
Yeah.
I just had actually, which they'll eventually be coming on the podcast, but a woman, it's a mother and daughters, and they have one like luxury brand, but they've started another wine brand, and they're using PET for their bottles.
Great.
And you know how everybody wants glass, but it's I don't know, it's pretty cool. And they've built the packaging too, that you basically, when you finish these bottles, they all fit back in this packaging, and everything goes right into your recycle bin. And the daughter went to school for science, like that's this big science degree, and so they have manufactured these PET bottles. They all fit into this packaging so that no styrofoam, no other stuff is added into it, and they go back in it and they go back into the recycle.
Love it. See, that like creative solutions to pretty dire problems are what we have to look at. Like necessity is the mother of invention, that kind of old proverb. We're really like staring down the proverbial barrel of having this sort of necessity. But I think a lot of the way, like a lot of our kind of consumer patterns and behaviors are still driven by this sort of narrative that like things are cool, like things are good, like we're not up against, crazy inflation and supply chain issues. Still like consume as if everything's fine.
Oh, we're all in a state of denial.
Yeah, right.
What do you think's the next for what do you think might replace glass if we're looking for an alternative package?
So, I think the conversation around like where glass is from is a big part of this, because like if we're looking at the like equity of farm labor, then we should also be looking at the like equity of like how sand is mined. And frankly, like where most of the sand in the world comes from that turns into glass bottles is not mined in a way that I think would like jive with people's like kind of like, oh, this wine is biodynamic, but it took slave labor to make the bottle. So it's like kind of shrugging that part off. There's aspects of that I think are going to drive our behaviors of consumption to a little bit more kind of like localized markets. It's going to become unsustainable to have these huge polluting ships doing like hauling empty glass from France just so that we can export our wine back to France full of these bottles. So that's obviously not the long-term solution. I think ultimately we're just going to have to kind of like turn ourselves inward and start producing or purchasing more locally. So doing something like what they've done in France for, hundreds of years, which is like show up at your local winery with your own jug, fill them up, you'll pay by the liter. And that's just going to be like, you're just going to drink what you've got there locally. Does it mean that we're going to have the same sort of like grocery store level, like options right now where you can walk in and choose from hundreds of different products? Probably not, but there's hundreds of different wineries nearby and you could probably purchase from people locally and be pretty happy with the results.
I love the idea of the refillable growlers or the jugs for wine. In the 90s, I wanted to have a store called Jugs where we just sold one white and one red.
Yeah.
It never got off the ground.
No, I bet, because I bet there's a lot of disappointed customers when they walk in. They're like, dang it, just refillable stuff.
There used to be a liquor store close to where I lived, and you would go in and they had the wall of beers, and then they even had ciders, and you would grab your jug and you would fill it up, and then you would just go pay for it, and then you would come back with your jug. And it was fantastic. I mean, we had a conversation with a girlfriend of mine recently about like if we really want to get down to the root of the issue with glass and that kind of stuff too, going back to where like you go into the grocery store and you fill up what you need of dry goods in your glass jars and all of that. Like bring it back to all of that, not even just the wine aspect of it, but
totally.
And then you're using what you need versus having a plethora of things and glass and items in your cabinets.
100%. That's exactly the direction that we need to be headed. We should not place all of the sort of like responsibility on the consumer for fixing these like the sort of larger problems that are systemic in terms of like how capitalism has set us up to just kind of over consume as an individual. But I do think that we get to make some healthy decisions for ourselves, particularly around like the amount that we're consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes, under a microscope when you're filling up a bottle and you're like, do I really need to take home 5 of these bottles of wine? Or can I just take like one at a time and just use that? Same thing goes for like honey and olive oil and lots of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Very, very, very true. So, Luke, as we're kind of wrapping down here, I like to ask any shout outs you want to give, anybody you respect right now in the industry.
Yeah, definitely. Vivian is the winemaker from Ram Cellars. I really love all of her wines. She makes wine not too far away from my house. She and I are actually going to be pouring at this queer wine festival on a Friday. She makes this Roussanne that I'm just like absolutely obsessed with, and I want to drink it whenever I see her. I'm like, did you bring it? Like, I need to try this right now. And I already mentioned Dan Rinke from Art and Science. But Art and Science is just a huge inspiration to me. Dan Rinke consults with Johan Vineyard here in the Willamette Valley now, and he was the grape grower there for a long time. Meredith and I have purchased Johan Vineyard's fruit for a long time, and so like anything he touches is just gorgeous. And I would be remiss to not mention Johan too. I think Morgan Hall there, the winemaker, she's an incredible person, and her dedication to this vineyard and the wines that they make there are just out of this world.
Awesome. That very, very good. And I really wish you a happy festival coming on Friday. It sounds like a fantastic event.
Yeah,
Luke, where can people find out more about you, Statera, and Larry's wines?
I think like Instagram is a really good place to hit us up. You can follow us on Instagram. I tend to be a very like conversational person, as I think you learned in this podcast. So if anybody ever has any questions, like we're pretty transparent and we like to open dialogue with folks. So hit us up, ask us anything you want to know about the wines. And that's a great place to get started. And then we can kind of go from there.
Sounds fantastic. Well, Luke, thank you. And I've got to grab a bottle of this Pétillant. That looks fantastic.
Yeah, let's get you one.
So thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Legends Behind the Craft podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.